It's dawn, April 19th, 1775. On a small Massachusetts green, 77 farmers and shopkeepers stand in the cold, clutching whatever muskets they could find. Marching toward them are 700 professional British soldiers, a wall of red moving through the mist. Their commander, John Parker, knows the math. He knows this isn't a fight they can win. He gives a strict order: stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. The British advance guard stops. They order the militia to disperse. Parker, seeing the hopeless odds, tells his men to fall back. And right at that moment, a shot rings out. That single bullet instantly transformed a localized political dispute into an open war. To understand why this morning on the Green was inevitable, we have to look at the economic and social pressures building since the end of the 7 Years' War. A few years earlier, Britain fought the massive and massively expensive French and Indian War. The empire needed cash to pay off its debts, so Parliament decided to tax their 13 American colonies. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, the Tea Act. The levies piled up. The colonists' grievance was straightforward. They had no voice in the British Parliament. No taxation without representation became the rallying cry against a government unilaterally extracting their wealth. The resistance hit a boiling point in 1773. Colonists boarded British ships and dumped a massive cargo of imported tea straight into Boston Harbor, destroying British property. Parliament retaliated with a heavy hand, passing laws the colonists dubbed the Intolerable Acts. They shut down Boston's port, stripped Massachusetts of self-government, and placed it under military occupation. Massachusetts residents stopped protesting and started preparing. Ordinary citizens formed militias, adopting the name Minutemen because they could be ready to fight in 60 seconds. In towns outside Boston, they quietly began stockpiling gunpowder and weapons. The British military governor, General Thomas Gage, caught wind of these secret armories. On the night of April 18th, he sent 700 troops marching out of Boston under the cover of darkness to seize the munitions. But colonial intelligence was already one step ahead. Riders like Paul Revere and William Dawes raced ahead of the column on horseback, frantically waking the countryside. As church bells rang and riders galloped through the dark, the element of surprise evaporated. By the time the British column reached Lexington, they weren't catching a sleeping countryside off guard. They were walking straight into a mobilized, armed populace waiting for them in the dawn mist. Which brings us back to that tense standoff on Lexington Green. For 2.5 centuries, historians have debated who fired that very first shot. Was it a twitchy British soldier? A militiaman behind a tavern window? The evidence remains completely inconclusive, but the consequence of that shot was immediate. Within seconds, the disciplined British regulars opened fire, unleashing a devastating volley directly into the scattered ranks of the militia. The skirmish was over in minutes. 8 colonists lay dead on the grass. 10 more were wounded. The British sustained only a single minor injury, reformed their lines, and continued their march toward their main target in Concord. On paper, it was a swift, overwhelming tactical victory for the Redcoats. Yet by spilling civilian blood, they crossed an irreversible line. The political debate over taxes died on Lexington Green, replaced by an armed uprising. When the British troops finally arrived in Concord to seize the stockpiled weapons, they found almost nothing. Thanks to the Midnight Riders' warnings, the colonists had already dispersed and hidden the bulk of their munitions. Meanwhile, hundreds of militiamen from surrounding towns had converged on Concord. They gathered on a hillside overlooking a small British detachment guarding the town's north bridge. This time, the numbers were reversed. The militia advanced down the hill, and the two sides exchanged fire. Outnumbered and outflanked at the river crossing, the British regulars broke and retreated. This exact moment at the bridge is widely considered the true shot heard round the world. American colonists had organized, stood their ground, and actively forced the King's army backward. Now, the British faced a harrowing 18-mile march back to the safety of Boston. Thousands of militiamen took up hidden positions behind stone walls, trees, and barns lining the route. To survive it, the British relied on traditional doctrine, moving as a dense, centralized column on the road. The colonists chose a different approach. They would fire into the Redcoats, then melt away before the British could mount an organized counterattack. The British Army was trained for open-field, regiment-to-regiment combat. They were entirely unprepared for decentralized guerrilla warfare. By refusing to fight on European terms, the colonial farmers stripped away the empire's tactical advantages and turned the retreat into a bloody gauntlet. This chart visualizes the final casualty counts from that long retreat. By the time the exhausted British column reached Boston, they had suffered 73 dead and around 200 wounded or missing. The colonial forces lost 49 men. The psychological impact of those numbers echoed across the Atlantic. An elite, globally feared military machine had just been severely battered by a localized network of tradesmen and farmers. As the British retreated behind their defenses in Boston, the landscape behind them continued to fill. Word of the fighting traveled faster than the troops, and by evening, thousands of armed men from across New England had arrived at the city limits. They dug trenches and established a perimeter that trapped the British military inside their own headquarters. The political gears turned just as fast. News of the fighting spread, and within weeks, the Second Continental Congress took formal control of these citizen militias, officially establishing the Continental Army and appointing a Virginian named George Washington to lead it. The War for Independence started here, not in a legislative hall, but on a village green, triggered by a single unclaimed gunshot. In the next episode, we'll see how the British responded to this humiliation by securing a victory they couldn't afford to repeat at Bunker Hill.